of the sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring.
A few thoughts for the new year to share by Dr. Kent Keith. I would call it Anyway. People are illogical, unreasonable, and self-centered. Love them anyway. If you do good, people will accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Do good anyway. If you are successful, you will win false friends and true enemies. Succeed anyway. Honesty and frankness will make you vulnerable. Be honest and frank anyway. The biggest men and women with the biggest ideas can be shot down by the smallest men and women with the smallest minds. Think big anyway. What you spend years building may be destroyed overnight. Build anyway. People really need help, but may attack you if you do help them. Help people anyway. Give the world the best you have, and you'll get kicked in the teeth. Give the world the best you have anyway.
Okay, so we're going to sing a song now, so you don't have to stand at attention. We're out of church. Church is over. But this is the first meeting of our club for 2018. So gee whiz, guess what song we're going to sing? Page 11, number 7, Old Lang Syne. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days of old Lang Syne? For old Lang Syne, my dear, for old Lang Syne, we'll take a cup of kindness yet for old Lang Syne. Happy New Year. Did a great job, by the way. Now, January birthdays. Holy smokes, we got 2 pages worth here. Josh Kattenberg, Jolene Letcher, Mohammed Kamar, Pete Haig, Corey Johnson, Scott Fiedler, Bernie DeWald, Greg Henson, Lauren Van Heusen, Mark Konzemius, Doug Hayek, Rami Rasmussen, Kendra Calhoun, Ben Ingbrett, Anita Keeley, Holly Brunick, Ryan Boshi, Terry Schmidt, Jeff Holcomb, Pan Holman, Larry Zickman, Glenn Jorgensen, Jen Bunkers, Matt Jensen, Steve Egger, Betty Oldencap, Jennifer Hosing. Whoa. All right. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Terry. Happy birthday to you.
Well, welcome to Rotary, everyone. We have a number of guests today, and hopefully we'll try not to forget anyone. Dr. Walt Carlson, you have some guests today.
Introduce Meg Hansen, who's the Executive Director of the South Dakota Board of Medical Examiners that I chair, and Bill Golden is the Assistant Attorney General, who also has the assignment of working with us to keep us out of trouble. Please welcome them.
Welcome both. Denny Pearson, you have a guest today.
Thank you. Fellow Rotarians, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Tom Kuhl, who's president of Democratic Forum and also executive director of the South Dakota Colleges Group. Tom Kuhl.
Tom. Monsignor Doyle, you have a guest today?
I'm here to introduce Mr. Lovely, who is very helpful to me in my old age.
Welcome, Mr. Lovely. Ted Toms, you have a guest today?
The conscience of City Hall, Councilor Teresa Staley.
Welcome, Councilor. Michael Huber, you have a guest today.
Yes. Today I have Samantha Spahn. She's the she's the Policy and Communications person for the South Dakota Voices for Peace, and Tanisa Islam is the Executive Director. Welcome.
Welcome. Jack Marsh, you have a guest today.
My guest today is Tim Ryan. Tim is the Director of Business Development, right, for Face It Together. Tim Ryan.
Welcome. Kurt Laudenbach is listing Marty Jackley as his guest, but he'll introduce him in a while. Angela Lammers, you have a guest?
Thank you. My guest today is Dirk Lammers. Dirk Lammers is my husband, and he's my business partner. Dirk Lammers, you may know him from his 13 years as a journalist with the Associated Press here in Sioux Falls.
Welcome, Dirk. Welcome. Shar Hofer, you have a guest today.
Fellow Rotarians, with me today is Emma Vogt. She is a senior at Roosevelt High School, and she is active in theater, dance, and is a fabulous singer.
I would second that. I've heard, Emma, I think I heard you sing at the recent jazz festival this past summer. Great job. Glad to have you here. Pat Cannon, you have a guest today?
Yeah, President Dave, Monsignor Doyle, and my fellow Rotarians, I got to get this right. I'd like to introduce Kelly Sullivan. Kelly is running for District 13 House in South Dakota.
Welcome, Kelly. Tyler Tordson, you have a guest today.
Good afternoon. Happy New Year, fellow Rotarians. I got with me Leon Leadercharge. He started today in my office as a policy intern for Senator Rounds.
Welcome, Leon. Brian Boudmeyer, you have a guest today.
Thank you, President Fifley, fellow Rotarians. With me is Lucas Fegan, originally from Sioux Falls. Many of you probably recognize him, architect and partner at Fegan Construction.
Welcome. Sean Peterson, you have a guest today.
Yes, thank you. I've got Colin Chose. He is the Solutions Sales Manager, A&B Business Solutions.
Welcome, Colin. Junior Rotarians today, we have Meredith Costello from O'Gorman High School. Welcome, Meredith. And visiting Rotarians, Greg May. Greg in the back. Welcome, Greg, as always. Did we miss any other guests? And my apologies in advance. Well, welcome everyone to Rotary. I want to thank our greeters today, Pam Hanneman and Sandy Friends, and thank you both. It's a big job. Thank you. Now for new business. Would Sandra Christensen please approach the podium? Yes, it's reporting to the principal's office, just like Dr. Peckus.
I did do it.
She just confessed. I want to congratulate Sandra on being a Paul Harris Fellow. We have a nice Paul Harris pin for you. I believe, is this times 2? +2. It is +2, correct. Thank you for all your work for Rotary, for being our past president, and for keeping us in line and on the right path. So thank you for everything.
I didn't tell him I was going to do this. Remember November. When you make your Paul Harris contribution in November, it doubles for the club.
Thank you. Perfect. Jesse Schmidt has a couple items to present, and I'd ask that Kathy Thorson also approach the podium.
President Dave and fellow Rotarians. Today we are going to induct, no inducing anybody. Yeah. I don't have to stand very tall to shrink underneath the podium, so. Okay, we're ready for Kathy. Kathy is the market president for Meta Bank in Sioux Falls, and she's been with Meta for 16 years. So I'm going to let Kathy tell you more about her.
Thank you, Jesse. Boy, did I pick the right day to do this. Is the room ever full? I am Kathy Thorson. I've been at Meta for about 16 years, 12 years in my current position. Prior to that, this will take some of you back. I started on the teller line at First Bank of South Dakota once upon a time, which is now U.S. Bank, and was at Marquette Bank for some time since, and then it was acquired by Wells Fargo. So there seems to be kind of a pattern there, doesn't there? I'm a South Dakota native. I grew up between Harrisburg and Canton on a farm. I graduated from Harrisburg High School before it was the fastest growing place in the country, practically. Now everybody knows where I graduated from back then, and I'm looking at Dave Eastland because I grew up 5 miles north of him. Sorry to pick on you. I'm also a graduate of Augustana College and with my master's from University of South Dakota. I volunteer in the community. I'm currently the president of Sioux Council Boy Scout Board. I'm the vice chair of the Foundation for Volunteers of America. I sit on Chamber Appeals, and I'm also now new to the Sioux Falls Development Foundation Board. I have 3 children, and yes, I have 9 grandchildren. 4 of them live in Chicago, so one of my favorite things to do is to hop a plane and go spend time in Chicago with my grandchildren. In addition to that, I love going to New York City. It's one of my favorite places to visit, see Broadway shows, and go to fun restaurants. Amy asked me if I would share a couple things about myself that you wouldn't find on my resume. If you know me, and I see many friends out there, you know how important my faith and the Lord is to me. Secondly, I would rather eat rocks than stand up here and talk to you today. It is not my favorite thing to do. And thirdly, once upon a time, I lived in Dallas, Texas, and worked for McDonald's. And I was a manager at a McDonald's restaurant, and so I am a graduate of Hamburger University in Chicago, Illinois. So, in closing, I want to thank Jessie so much, who feels like she's been my friend forever. Thank you for your sponsorship. Thank you for my many friends who are out there supporting me and smiling at me. And lastly, for those of you who I don't know, please take time to introduce yourself so we too can be friends. Thank you for allowing me to join Rotary. I'm really excited. And now this large group is really here to see you, Marty, so we're going to let you go next. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Kathy. Glad you decided to speak instead of eat rocks. Jesse, while you're up here, you want to give us a budget update? No, I don't. No? Okay. She couldn't be induced to talking about that any further. Cindy Peterson, would you please come up? Do we need the Jeopardy theme playing in between? Would that help? Or? I'm kidding.
Happy New Year, fellow Rotarians. I am still chairing the Centennial Fund, and as we step into the new year, I couldn't be more thrilled to share with this group that the fund is now at $71,035. So we have made a wonderful, wonderful step forward to our goal. The campaign will expire at the end of January, and there are still a lot of folks out there who have supported this campaign in the past, and I strongly encourage you to be a part of it. for this year with all the great things that we're doing. You'll be getting an email in the next week, again, about those organizations being supported and the way you can give online. If you prefer to do it the old-fashioned way, we can certainly get you a brochure. We've got them in the back and have had them at the tables. And there's a good chance you're going to hear from a board member if you haven't. Please take their call and please consider your investment in this year's Centennial Fund. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Cindy, for all your work, and please donate generously. If there are any items that you'd like to be included or provided for in our next budget, please see Jesse Schmidt about those. Business reminder, membership dues are due, pardon the redundancy there, but it's quite simple. It takes you about 20, 30 seconds to just click on the blue link on that email, give it your credit card, it's a secure line, you're good to go. We also have a board of director vacancy. If you would like to be considered for that, please come and see me. We would love to have you join our team. And now I'll let Kurt introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Dave, and we'll try not to induce Marty. Marty Jackley is the Attorney General, goes without saying, for South Dakota and a Republican candidate for governor. Prior to serving as Attorney General, Marty served as the U.S. Attorney for the state of South Dakota. Prior to public service, Marty was a partner in a law firm in Rapid City, where he was born and raised. Marty received an electrical engineering degree from the School of Mines and Technology and a law degree from the University of South Dakota. He and his wife Angela have 2 children, ages 11 and 13, and reside in Pierre and maintain still ranches in western South Dakota they'd love to visit when they have time to. So without further ado, Rotarians, let's give Marty Jackley a warm welcome.
Thank you so much, and I just want to do a special thank you. You have always made me and my family feel welcome. I remember back when I became your United States Attorney, and I moved to Sioux Falls, lived on Pillsbury Street, how welcome you made my wife feel. She was a nurse, switched over to Specialty Select, had 2 little kids, and it was a wonderful place to raise our kids. You know, now I reflect back, and Michael's literally 12 days away from driving. You know, his mother said, she's nervous, and I said, well, he's been driving at the ranch for 5 years, he'll be fine. And my little Isabella's already 11. In fact, this weekend we were up in Watertown, and we got to face the Sioux Falls 6th grade girls elite team, and we were humbled. We made it to the championship, so it was Sioux Falls versus Pierre, and after a double overtime, Sioux Falls won. But I tell you what, all the girls played hard, and it was so wonderful to see the sportsmanship of all the schools, and especially the Sioux Falls girls. So you keep raising them right, so thank you. You know, I wanted to talk a little bit about some current events, focus on legislation, but really open it up to you so that you've got time with your Attorney General to ask me questions about session, what's going on in the state, and things that are important to you. You know, I wanted to take just a minute and reflect back. I don't always know if it's a good thing that you make a headline in the front page of the Argus Leader, but a year ago when I was here almost to the day, we talked about, and you know I've always been an independent Attorney General for you. I've always tried to do what I think is best, irrespective sometimes of the politics. And we stepped out, and you can see it was a Rotary Club where we talked about it's maybe time for an ethics commission. And in fact, this is the Argus quote, and since it was Dana Ferguson, it's accurate. So we embraced it. And when I say we, Republicans and Democrats. And it was from that came the Accountability Board. And you see Speaker Mickelson there that I will tell you showed strong leadership. I was in about a half a dozen meetings with him, and he did what a speaker needs to do. And it wasn't just what you see in Washington. It was a Republican-Democrat bill. In fact, the sponsor was Karin Soley from here in town. And you saw the Republican governor, the Republican attorney general, Democrat leadership, everybody coming together and saying, we can do better. It's easy for me to say we can do better because I get to clean up the messes. You know, sometimes the public thinks, well, Jackley runs EB5 and Gear Up, and it's like, I don't run any of those programs. I'm the hammer. At the end of the day, if they weren't run right, if there wasn't proper oversight, the Attorney General gets involved. And now we have an accountability board that can help with that. And I think that's a good thing, and that's the way we should do business here in South Dakota. This morning at 8 o'clock, we received the Supreme Court news of granting cert or denying cert. And in South Dakota, we are frankly leading the nation when it comes to the fairness tax. When I say that, it's not just us alone, but it's 34 attorney generals, the National Governors Association, the majority of businesses, educators that have said federal law that was created back in 1967, but really 1992, isn't fair. It's not right what it's doing to our Main Street businesses. And so our legislature, Republican and Democrat, and our governor stepped up with Senate Bill 106 and passed the fairness tax. We are primed to be at the U.S. Supreme Court. On Fridays are good days if you get a notice, because that means you likely got cert. Mondays at 8:30 are a bad day if you get notice, because typically that means you were denied to be heard. So this morning I got the call at 8:30, said we're not on the list. So we're still alive. We're still making the argument of why this is important. And it really boils down to this. It's Main Street America. It's Main Street South Dakota. And I put up a couple pictures there. Lushbaz was in my hometown in Sturgis. You know, you weren't, at the young age, you weren't worried about getting beer. You were worried about getting 22 shells. So that's where I went to buy 22 shells when I could see over the counter. But it's businesses like that across our state that have closed. I mean, they've closed for various reasons, but one of those reasons is if you were to buy a hammer at Hardware Hank, you were going to pay now about 6.5-cent sales tax that benefits our state and benefits our city. And because of federal law, you were to buy that same hammer over the internet, the out-of-state company doesn't pay a dime. And that's not right. And it's something that we're going to continue leading the nation on, and hopefully you will hear more about it. A lot of the Attorney General's legislative package, a lot of what you're going to hear me talk about is drugs, but I want to talk about an important component, and that is prevention first. Prevention is the most financially secure way and the moral way to address drugs, and we're doing everything we can. Just one of the programs, in addition to No Meth Ever, is Project Stand Up. And Sarah Rayburn, the coordinator for Project Stand Up, is in the back. I hope that if you have businesses and want signs or brochures or anything of that nature, we'd like to give you that material. Just quickly, what Project Stand Up is, it's an anonymous texting. So what the concept is we want to give every one of you with a cell phone to become the eyes and ears of law enforcement. We rolled it out after 6 months. We gained 244 suspects in 69 jurisdictions. What that tells me as your Attorney General is the public, the communities, the educators, the parents are tired of drugs in their community, and they're making a difference. It needed to be anonymous. Got to be a little careful. I got a couple of judges here that I went to law school with, so they got enough dirt on me anyhow. But it's anonymous, which means I don't know, the sheriff doesn't know, the DCI agents don't know who's calling in the way it needed to be that way. Sometimes it might be a member of somebody's family, a loved one, that they see it's doing drugs are devastating. Maybe it's the next door neighbor that you're scared to death of and you don't want to become harmed. And so in addition to the opportunity to call Mike Milstead and your local sheriff, this opportunity is there to make it anonymous. And all you do is text the word drugs to 82257, and it gives you an opportunity to answer some questions and help us rid drugs out of the community. There's also an education component. I've talked to some of your council members about becoming more and more active in Sioux Falls. Help us. No tax dollars are part of this. Sanford stepped up and helped us. And I want to be fair to Vera, too. They just stepped up this morning and helped us with No Meth Ever. So healthcare, community, business, women and men are helping us. Thank you for that. Now on to legislation. You know, I will tell you, having been your United States Attorney, having been your Attorney General, and having been chairman of the nation's Attorney Generals, that we have a national meth epidemic and, frankly, an opioid epidemic that is hitting us here in South Dakota. It's coming from our southern borders. We've reached a point where here in South Dakota, and I always want to credit the legislature, when I went to them in 2012 and said we can stop the manufacture of meth in our state if you take away the ingredient pseudoephedrine, the legislature overwhelmingly listened, Republican and Democrat. So they passed it. It came effective in 2013, and you can see from the numbers, we no longer manufacture very much meth in South Dakota because you can't get the ingredient. Under that same concept, I think the way we address the national meth epidemic with all the meth that comes in from our southern border because the federal government isn't listening is to simply address the drug dealers. To say that if you're going to deal drugs in the state of South Dakota, you're going to face enhanced penalties and mandatory minimums. I think this can be not only the morally right thing to do, because drugs affect communities, families, the healthcare system with ER visits. They affect your security and safety. They affect the workforce and work productivity. This can be the opportunity to stop drugs in our communities, and frankly, the opportunity to, if you can't get methamphetamine, to remove some of the possession and the user-type cases, those ingestion cases that are sitting in our jails and our penitentiaries, to have them where they no longer can get the drugs so they're not sitting in jail. I think this is a win-win. I'm looking forward to working with the legislature. When I say working with the legislature, that's exactly what it is. It's a partnership. It's for me to come and respect the legislative process, but to say we have a problem in the nation. We have an opportunity in South Dakota to fix that, and here's how. And just briefly, the here's how, all I've done is I took all, and this is, the first part is meth only. The next two parts are all controlled substances that are Schedule 1 and 2, the opioids. Under the first stage of this is to simply say every meth felony will be enhanced one level. By way of example, if it's simply right now, if you're distributing meth and you're caught in the state of South Dakota, it's a Class 4 felony. It's simply a 10-year felony. We would up it to a Class 3 and a 15-year felony. Similarly, because it is so important we send that message to drug dealers and minors, we'll take that current felony that's a 25-year felony to distribute to minors, and we're going to up it one level to make it 50 years. The next step is we need to address the mandatory sentences for all controlled, the Schedule 1 and 2 controlled substances. I took the mandatory minimums that already exist. Many people don't realize this, rarely ever. In fact, I had a meeting with all of our assistant attorney generals, and I said, tell me when the last time a judge actually enforced a mandatory minimum that you're prosecuting. And nobody could remember. And that's a problem. So this is an opportunity for our legislature to say, we have a significant problem. We have mandatory minimums that are in place, and we simply want to have a reasonable way to enforce them. And so what I've done is simply left the existing mandatory minimums in place and put in place the federal safety valve guidelines that I know work because I was your U.S. attorney from 2006 to 2009, and we applied them. They work across the nation. There's a body of case law, and they're very practical. They basically say you won't have to serve that 1 year in the state penitentiary if 5 things apply. You can't be a violent criminal that brings harm to people, and you see the list. The other important one is you have to cooperate with law enforcement. In other words, you got caught distributing drugs in the state of South Dakota, and therefore you have to tell us where you got the drugs. And if you won't, then you're going to have to serve out that mandatory sentence. It has been an effective way that the federal government has used to address drugs, and I think it's something that will work well and that I hope our legislature takes a serious look at. Kind of along the same lines, we've had significant impact in the state of South Dakota when it comes to drug overdoses. These are the Department of Health's numbers. As you can see, in 2016, we don't have 2017 yet, but we had 51 drug overdose deaths. Nothing like experienced in other places in the nation, but that opioid epidemic is coming here to South Dakota. When we arrest a 19-year-old who's presumed innocent, but with 20,000 fentanyl pills in Chamberlain, we have a problem. And so what this is a consistent message, again, to clean up an area of the law that there's disagreement across our state, and to simply say, if you're going to manufacture and distribute Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 controlled substances into our communities unlawfully, then there's going to be consequences. And there's a 2-level enhancement if the drugs you supply kill somebody. By way of example, right now the distribution of meth is a 10-year felony. If you distribute meth to somebody and they die from that meth, it becomes a 25-year felony. I capped it at a Class C felony so that it doesn't go beyond manslaughter, because in some areas of the state, conservative areas, they consider that conduct manslaughter, which is that Class C felony, which is up to life. In less conservative areas, they consider it simply distribution, a 10-year felony, even though somebody died. We need to add consistency and add that consistent message that drug dealers, if you're bringing drugs to South Dakota, there'll be significant consequences, so we literally choke out the distribution of drugs in our state. Data breaches. We're one of the last states in the nation to address this in its time. When you look at Equifax, you look at Target, Hundreds of thousands of South Dakotans' financial security has been jeopardized. Their identity has been lost. We need to have a law that's not burdensome, that's common sense, and that's clear that if there's a breach that happens, this is what should occur. First of all, there has to be a discovery. We shouldn't play games with saying it should have been discovered. We ought to say that if you actually discover it, there are certain things you must do. The big one is you need to let the consumers that you just gave out their financial security, their personal information, you need to let them know in 45 days this happened, and you need to let them know by written notice or electronic notice or by substitute notice. It's as simple as that. And similarly, if it's a large breach, if it's over breach and it's over 250 South Dakotans, you need to let the Attorney General know so he or she can take steps to investigate it, to catch the bad people involved in that, and again, that's a 45-day notice. I would guess there'll be a good discussion this legislative session about this. The key points we're going to see disagreement on is the 45 days. I'll be frank with you. Some states are 30 days, some states are 60 days. I split it. Similarly, with the 250 notice to the Attorney General, some states require less, some states require more. We wanted this to be the beginning discussion point. ICAC operations, and I want to tell you, you have an excellent Internet Crimes Against Children task force right here in Sioux Falls. That's made up of the Attorney General, the Sheriff, and the Chief, and all the deputies, along with assistance from federal authorities. You can see that we've run human trafficking operations. Unfortunately, we catch bad people during those operations. It's just like really what you watch on Catch a Predator. We'll take a DCI agent, we'll scale their age down to about 10 or 12, we'll advertise them for inappropriate sexual activities, and bad people will respond. Right now, when it involves the human trafficking, it's a Class 2 felony, which is a 25-year felony. In these 56 different cases, we've been having defense lawyers raise the defense, well, really, a child didn't get hurt. That because there wasn't a real victim, you shouldn't be able to bring this, you should have to bring something else under the law. I, as a parent of 2 young children, and frankly, as Attorney General, don't want to wait until a child is hurt. I think that this particular crime is based upon your acts and conduct, your act of responding to that ad, your act of showing up at a hotel room with the exact amount of cash, your act of bringing other materials that you're going to use in that inappropriate conduct is the offense. And I'm just simply going to ask the legislature to say that if these violations occur, we shouldn't have to wait until there's an actual real victim hurt. And lastly, the Sex Offender Registry. We are blessed in South Dakota. We have one of the best in the nation. We lead the nation in our Sex Offender Registry. And what this legislation is that we want to continue it. We have about 3,600 individuals on our Sex Offender Registry in South Dakota. We have a 98.5% compliance rate. With this legislation focuses on that 1.5% that isn't complying. And what it does, it sets out specifically the definition and the rules when it comes to community safety and school zones so that there's no question. It says if you're one of those repeat offenders not following the rules, there are enhanced consequences. And so that, in essence, is the Attorney General's legislative package. We're going to be very, very active this session working on these particular solutions, along with other matters before the legislature, like we always are. You know, it's a fun and busy time of year. Angela, my wife, mentioned the other day, she said, you've been extremely busy talking to legislators on the phone. I'm going to get back tonight and have some late dinner with a few of them. And I said, you know, I've always viewed this as that partnership. And I have a lot of friends in the legislature, Republican and Democrat. We don't always agree on all the issues, but it's a time most of the people that take that time to serve mean well. And they work very hard at it. It's going to be a tough session. There isn't going to be a lot of funding. But I tell you what, there's enough funding with a $4.17 billion budget to fund good programs and to do good things. I think when you look overall at this particular package that I'm bringing, I plan on making the strong argument that meth is all over our state. We can stand by and do nothing, or we can show strong leadership and make a difference. And what I'm asking the legislature to do is to take those proposals, make them better. There's 105 legislators, some in the room, maybe even 1 or 2 on judiciary, that I'm going to need your help making it better. But there's some opportunities here to help better protect our communities, and I'm going to do just that as your Attorney General. With that, what questions? What do you want to know about the legislative package or other programs that we have going?
Dr. Pei. I'd like to know where we are with medical marijuana in the state, marijuana itself, and hemp.
I'll give you a general statement. If anybody wonders what my position is on marijuana, you should go ask the Flandreau tribe. I think marijuana is a gateway drug. I think it affects public health and safety, and I don't support it. Now, what I do support is what the South Dakota legislature did last year. I mean, technically, we have a form of medical marijuana in the state. And what I told legislators that it would have to have three things before I could support that piece of legislation last year, and they did just that. Number one, I think everybody in this room hopes that scientific and medical research reaches a point that if there's a way to help that kid having a seizure or a way to help that ailing adult fighting cancer, even if it involves a derivative of THC, we want that discovered and we want it out there to help. So if there is an FDA approval that there's a medical purpose for a derivative of THC, then that's step one. Step two would be a South Dakota physician must prescribe it, just like any other controlled substance. And step three, a South Dakota pharmacist would dispense it, so we can make sure we know what it is. We can make sure that we're not over prescribing it and overusing it. That is currently the law in South Dakota. I went one step further as the outgoing chairman of the nation's attorney generals. I sent a letter to both the DEA along with the FDA and said that this is an issue that 50 state attorney generals are hearing about, 50 state legislators and governors are dealing with. We have no idea. The federal government's policy changes on this about every other week. I don't know what their policy is. I don't know what it was when it came to Flandreau. I know that the U.S. attorney wasn't prosecuting it. The attorney general was, and it was a violation of state and federal law. But that I asked them, please fast track the testing. Because if there is a way to help that kid having a seizure, figure out a way to get approval on it and to move it in that direction. And if there's not, then allow the other folks to say there is no medical approved method right now and end that conversation until there's further testing. Not much as typical happens with the federal government have we heard back on. They both responded and said they're working on it. We haven't heard much. Right now, there are a couple of marijuana provisions on the ballot. Secretary Krebs is looking at whether or not they've met the proper number of signatures on the petition. I have to be a little careful because I am defending Secretary Krebs on whatever her decision is on it as the Attorney General, but they have not been yet approved for the ballot unless that happened this morning. Great question. Other questions?
Over here. Jesse Schmidt with the Better Business Bureau. Marty, I appreciate the proposed change in the law for data breaches. As you know, at the end of the year, we had several seniors that were victims of the grandparent scam to some really significant numbers. At the Better Business Bureau, we get calls every single day, as does your office, about the grandparent scam and the IRS scam. 2 years ago, when the IRS scam, when the call center was shut down in India, our calls to the Better Business Bureau across the country decreased 95% in one day. We did know that within a short amount of time that would happen again. Do you know, is there federal action to identify the most current call center in India for the IRS scams and then for the grandparent scams?
First of all, I want to thank the Better Business Bureau and the AARP for the partnership that they share with the Attorney General in helping on these scams. It's extremely valuable. And just to give you a concept, those other two organizations are not in these numbers, but your Attorney General fields about 35,000 consumer-related issues that we help on. And a lot of those were because of Equifax, but a lot of them are these grandparent and other type scams. And they do affect real South Dakotans. We had one instance in South Dakota where a grandparent that didn't have that money lost over $100,000. So this is serious. I'm not sure what the CFPB is doing. What I can tell you, the attorney generals, each of us have a consumer chief. So there's 56. I know some people say, well, Jackley, your math's not very good for an electrical engineer. There's 50 attorney generals in 6 territories working on this issue. As you can tell, there's an extreme frustration, not just by me, but of many of my attorney general colleagues, that we haven't gotten necessarily from Washington what we need, so we just take it into our own hands. We did that with the drugs coming over the Mexican border in 2016 with the Attorney General agreement. We're doing that in relation to the CFPB and these consumer issues. We're doing it in a lot of different areas. We've kind of essentially done it on the fairness tax. We haven't received anything since 1992, and so I can't tell you what the federal government's doing on that, but I can tell you we are working on it, and we have good attorney generals. The challenge is, and again, some of it goes back to federal law, we have found out that in many of these servers in our investigations, warrants that are being issued by state court judges are not necessarily being honored. And it came up in the Microsoft case. I know Congress is talking about it. The attorney generals are doing. I've taken a stern position on these investigations. My position is, you know what? The people of South Dakota elect an attorney general to protect them. Judges are typically elected or they're appointed to make sure we prosecutors are behaving appropriately. So when an attorney general or a prosecutor needs information about $100,000 lost to a grandparent, and a judge says it's appropriate for us to go looking for that information, there is no reason a U.S. company shouldn't be held to the same standard as anybody else just because they've got a server overseas. And I'm firm on that, and I believe that almost all of my colleagues that signed, I call it the Microsoft letter, are firm on that. I don't think we can fully address what you're talking about on that investigation until we get the support, and it's the criminal hammer. That is that if you're a company and you're profiting off this and you're engaging in this, there are consequences. And that means if it's a call center doing this, or you're part of robocalls or whatever have you, you can't just look the other way. That's what Backpage.com does on those human trafficking ads we put up there. Congress gave them immunity in 1996 to put an advertisement up of a young girl for the sale of sex, and attorney generals can't prosecute that. That's why 50 of us were very specific to Congress and said, about 2 years ago we wrote you, 49 of us, and said, we've got to protect the public with this. You didn't hear us, and now 50 of us are writing you again. It's that same concept that these folks are making a profit on all these different things, on the scams, on the human trafficking. We've got to be able to address that. And I think that you're going to see a direction go with the Attorney General community to continue to push that. Great question. I think until we address the call centers, we're not going to be able to address what's happening on all these various scams.
Chuck Hyatt, I want to thank you and congratulate you for serving as the chair of the National Attorney General Organization. I know there have been several state leaders serving in similar roles in various disciplines, so that's great for our state. I think one of the things that makes that possible is the centrist kind of spirit in South Dakota. You've talked a lot about Republican and Democratic cooperation. I'm concerned about the radicalization of both ends of the party, and how would you see yourself working with those going forward?
Great question, and you're exactly right. But I want to encourage you, what you see in Washington isn't what you necessarily see elsewhere, and most importantly in the state of South Dakota. I mean, if you look at, and I'll just talk about me personally, last election, I was endorsed by 66 out of 66 state's attorneys. That's Republican and Democrat. When I ran to become chairman of the nation's attorney generals, it was pretty split between Republican and Democrat. And I've never given up my principles, but people know that good government needs to find solutions. And when I was ultimately became chairman of the AGs, the North Dakota Attorney General Wayne Stenjum gave my nomination speech. But now Senator Catherine Masto-Cortez, a Democrat from Nevada, a Democrat from Nevada, gave my seconding speech. When I became chairman, I said, you know what, there was a thing that we used to do, and that is we had joint chairs. And what I mean by that is we have important committees, and the chairman gets to pick the chairs of those committees. I said we were going to have co-chairs, one Republican, one Democrat, and I expect us to work together and get things done. And that was one of the best decisions I ever made. We got a lot done with the Attorney General community. In fact, when you talk about getting stuff done, you notice on the sales tax issue, I talked about the 34 attorney generals that have joined with me, the 35th. Those are Republicans and Democrats, because unlike Washington, we get stuff done. You depend upon us to make decisions. And I think you see that in Pierre. That slide that I showed you a little bit earlier with Speaker Mickelson and Karen Soleil and Spencer Hawley and me and the governor, there's Republicans and Democrats in there. And you know what? We put together a good bill. We don't always agree on every issue. And it's okay that you need to be firm in your principles and your values. But it's okay also to be good government and to work together and get something done. And I think that's something I hope you expect from your elected officials that go to Pierre. It's something that I see all the time. And frankly, for those pieces of legislation that I put forth, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you should want meth out of your communities. You should want opioids out of affecting your families and addiction affecting your loved ones. And there's good solutions from Republicans and Democrats when it comes to that issue. And I can just give you this last assurance. I've always done it from the time I was running for Attorney General to being chair of the AGs. I'm going to work with both sides because I'm everybody's Attorney General. And lastly, I just want to conclude that you talked about former chairman of the AGs. The only title better than former chairman is dad. So, you know, we have a great leadership now. I work with that leadership as much as I can. But I'll be frank with you. I mean, I'm trying to be the best husband and dad I can be. You elected me to be Attorney General, and as you can see, I'm focused on that. And I'll be back in Sioux Falls trying that death penalty case with a correction officer January 29th. I'm going to argue in front of the United States Supreme Court if they ever give us that strong voice. And then, frankly, I'm going to go try public corruption gear up March 1. And then I've got this other job application out there that I do in my spare time.
Thank you. Dave Landry, retired Medtronic registered nurse, and
from Fort Meade. I used to be a tour guide at Fort Meade.
And
I made
a former student of your grandfather, your namesake, Martin. Is there enough separation between the addiction and the criminality of meth and opioid usage to treat it as an epidemic like we did in the mid-20th century with tuberculosis or polio? With regional facilities instead of using just incarceration?
Great question, and the answer is absolutely yes. There are three components to beating this. Number one, it's prevention. That is the moral one, that is the cheapest one, and that is the most effective one. That's why, in the words of Denny Sanford, I pickpocketed him $100,000 for Project Stand Up. That's why Avera just kicked in on No Meth Ever. We need the business community, the education community, the law enforcement community to all step up on prevention. Please go to nomethever.com if you have questions on that. You'll see great videos. The Augie, I can call them kids because I'm 47 now, did one of the best videos I've ever seen on meth, piecing together how to make it with what it does to your life. The second step is treatment, and judges get the credit for this, but drug courts, hope courts, veterans courts are important. And when you talk about treatment, we as a state need to invest in some form or fashion of a very large treatment facility. You'll hear Sheriff Milstead talk about a triage center. I support all those general concepts, but treatment is the next most effective and important way to address addiction. The third leg of that stool, which is what I've really talked about today, is the enforcement end. But sometimes that enforcement end is important. If you looked at the manufacturer numbers when we stepped up and on that Attorney General bill said we're not going to allow the ingredients of pseudoephedrine to be available, we stopped it. We now have less than 10 manufacturing labs in the state. I'm going to tell you most of the time it's some idiot that Googled how to make meth and he blew up his garage and we showed up and charged him with manufacture. That's the reality. I suggest that right now it's a critical time. And in this critical time, we have an opportunity. And we have an opportunity to send that strong message to drug dealers. If you're going to deal drugs, there's always been stiff consequences. But now if you're going to deal drugs in the state of South Dakota, there's realistic enhancements, there's realistic mandatory sentences, and you're going to spend time in the state penitentiary. And I think we need all three of those to address both the opioids as well as the meth. You'll see it was a very structured approach by me. I talked about how The enhancements on the dealing and the manufacture just went to meth, but the mandatory minimums applied to everything. Similarly, if there's a death, it applies to everything. And so it was a very thought-out approach. I think it will work. I'm waiting for 105 legislators to make it better. We in law enforcement want to do everything we can to make you safe, but we need to have the tools to do that. And if we arrest a drug dealer and you don't apply a mandatory minimum, and you don't put them in jail and you put them on probation, we are not making your children and grandchildren any safer. And if we send that strong message and reasonable message, drug courts, hope courts are for users. They're for somebody that's gotten addicted that we still want to save. If you're a drug dealer, I don't want to save you. I want to put you in the state penitentiary and keep you from dealing drugs into our communities. And I hope that the legislature sees the importance of this. I know they do because they're already calling me. This is good legislation. It can be made better. And that's something that, you know, being an attorney general, I had to learn. I mean, when I became your AG in 2009, I learned right away, don't get married to your legislation. There are changes that will make it better. And I think it's going to come this session. But great question. But keep in mind, it's prevention, it's treatment, and it's enforcement. And you got to have all three. You know, Fife and I were next to each other in law school, so he said, you're done. So, so he doesn't get up and tell a story. I just want to conclude by saying, you know, you're the business leaders of this community in our state. Thank you for that. There are a lot of subjects that I covered, but drugs are affecting everything across our state. Help me, help make your communities better. Thank you so much, and I'll stick around a little bit and answer any other questions you guys have. Thank you.
I shared every meal for 2 years in law school with this young man. He was a little bit younger than I was, and I can tell you 3 things about Marty Jackley. Number 1, he has a very hearty appetite. Number 2, he was well-mannered in his table manners. And number 3, back in 1992, I could already tell that this was a devoted, lifelong public servant, and I'm not the least bit surprised at his amount of success. I want to thank you, Marty, for speaking to us today. Our cup of the Rotary Test is a memento.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Next week, we will be observing MLK Day, so we will not have a meeting in honor of Martin Luther King Day. Then the 22nd, we will have Paige Sarda speaking about the REACH program, and we will also start a little bit early that day so that Michelle LaValle can talk to us about some strategic planning we've been doing on behalf of the Rotary Board. Again, thank you, Marty, for speaking today. Thank you to our greeters, and Rotary's adjourned.